Wow, the future sure is fun, isn't it? While we don't have flying cars like Back to the Future 2 promised us, we do have the technology to instantly render images of Garfield with tits doing 9/11, so that's pretty weird. Even the US government is evolving with the new Secretary of War. I mean, I personally would have gone with God of War, but what do I know? I'm a Canadian. Deciding that in these trying times, with numerous rising catastrophes, what's really important to dedicate time and energy towards is honoring the brave American soldiers who slaughtered a bunch of children over 100 years ago.
Making it clear without hesitation that the soldiers who fought in the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890 will keep their medals. And we're making it clear that they deserve those medals. This decision is now final, and their place in our nation's history is no longer up for debate. We salute their memory, we honor their service, and we will never forget what they did.
Yes, when he's not being accused of drugging and raping women, Pete Hegseth is making an official announcement that the perpetrators of the Wounded Knee Massacre will be receiving their medals of honor after all. Seems odd, doesn't it? But out of nowhere, something that most Americans barely think about should be brought up personally by a high-ranking official in an administration constantly doing anything they can to avoid releasing the Epstein files.
Legalize comedy!
For those who don't know, the Wounded Knee Massacre is a widely accepted horrific act perpetrated by the US government against the Lakota people. In 1887, the US passed the Dawes Act that broke up tribal lands into individual allotments, forcing Native people into farming communities in an attempt to assimilate them. The result was a massive land loss for the Lakota and other nations. This ignited what will become known as the Ghost Dance movement, where Plains tribes began a renewal of their traditional ways and promoted the idea of expelling white settlers. The US government saw the growing movement as a threat and began increasing their army presence by 1890. They intentionally targeted Lakota members such as Sitting Bull, who would eventually be assassinated on December 15, 1890, during an arrest attempt. On December 23rd, a large band of Lakota people led by Chief Spotted Elk, also known as Bigfoot, traveled towards Pine Ridge seeking refuge. By this point, many of them were sick and starving, and Bigfoot was ill with pneumonia. On December 28, 1890, they were intercepted by the US 7th Cavalry and escorted to Wounded Knee Creek. There, hundreds of people, mostly women and children, surrounded by soldiers at gunpoint, were asked to disarm. As the tensions rose, a Lakota man named Black Coyote refused to give up his rifle, and shots began firing. The soldiers unleashed gunfire, massacring the elderly, women, children, and the few remaining men of the tribe.
Surviving women and children ran from the killing zone to seek protection in a nearby ravine, jumping into the ditch. Then military discipline among the soldiers disintegrated. Officers could not control their men as they chased down the survivors on horseback over several miles and killed them. Then some soldiers went around killing the wounded laying on the ground.
The soldiers killed indiscriminately, and survivors reported that children who were seen attempting to flee while screaming were chased down by cavalrymen and executed. Later, a US burial party found bodies scattered across the snow, buried in a mass grave. Sick, starving, and dying people were mass executed in a horrific act contributing to the ongoing genocide of indigenous people perpetrated by the United States government. Now, why would anyone in their right mind want to honor that? Well, at the time the Army called it a battle, and 20 soldiers who participated received the Medal of Honor, an action that is understandably condemned to this day. But fast forward over 100 years, and Pete Hegseth, doing his best impression of a divorced car salesman who follows you home, proudly announced that the war criminals who slaughtered kids should be awarded the highest and most prestigious military decoration the goddamn United States of America can bestow. Now, far be it from me to say something like it feels a little bit fashy to want to memorialize child murderers as heroes, since apparently we can't use that word anymore.
What is it that you want people to do when you call them Nazis? What is it that you want them to do when you call them fascists?
Past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him, terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler.
Which is always a great sign when people who are doing very paint-by-numbers versions of fascism want to restrict you from calling it out. But just like in Alex Jones dressing up as a certain World War II bad guy to troll the libs, behind closed doors, I don't think he or any other member of the administration mind being called white supremacists, because that's what they are.
Stephen Miller and I were friends at Duke. I generally like Stephen. We worked on an immigration debate, which we brought Peter Brimlow to campus.
It's an entire administration of rapists, pedophiles, and unrepentant white supremacists running the most powerful country on earth. Hell, the official government accounts have stopped wasting time with dog whistles and are blatantly advertising how much they love genocide of what they consider to be the lower race. Here's why you should push back and never feel ashamed to call out this bullshit for what it is. After the Civil War, one that was fought by racist traitors for the right to own and sell other human beings as property, the US failed to do a true mea culpa. The Confederacy was never fully put on trial for treason or crimes against humanity. The South was allowed to rewrite the war as a noble fight for states' rights, which is also known as the lost cause myth.
These pro-slavery advocates, for instance, you had guys like James Henry Thornwell, who, as one historian says, unlike capitalism or communism, which Thornwell believed altered social norms, he avowed that slavery was part of the social fabric and therefore unalterable. He even believed that Southern slaves had better lives than the British working class. And you'll find a lot of that kind of rhetoric with pro-slavery Southerners in the 1850s. So of course that got incorporated into the general myth. The next part is probably the one that you'll see the most on the internet. They either downplay or deny slavery's role in the causation of the Civil War. Normally they'll cloak it with things like states' rights or Southern loyalty. And in fact, they'll go out of their way to lionize Southerners' loyalty.
This minimalized slavery's role in the war and led to the foundation of Jim Crow segregation, lynching, and systemic disenfranchisement that continues to this day. White supremacist groups like the KKK grew in power, using terror to suppress black political power for decades. It cemented white supremacy in law and culture, normalized treason as heritage, and justified the continued conquest and oppression of native nations. Treaties and agreements that were supposed to be signed into law were broken, and massacres like Sand Creek in 1864 and Wounded Knee in 1890 followed. There was no 40 acres and a mule as promised. No trials for enslavers or Confederate soldiers, and no structural reform of land ownership or wealth distribution.
Real history. You've probably seen their efforts to honor the Confederacy, but maybe you didn't know it was the UDC. They're the ones who covered the Southern landscape with memorials for Confederate leaders and soldiers. They used their fundraising and lobbying skills to pressure local governments into erecting monuments in prominent public spaces like courthouses and state capitals.
Installed here next to the state capitol by the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy donated this memorial to the city back in the 30s.
If you refuse to hold ideologies or people accountable for slavery or genocide, then they don't go completely away. They morph into other systems of oppression like unpaid prison labor and institutional racism. In Canada, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about the genocide of Indigenous people, but only 15 of the 95 calls to action were ever completed, and they were mostly ceremonial ones like land acknowledgements. So it's no surprise that there's a growing genocide denial movement in the country that thinks the residential school system was either partially beneficial or completely fake. Fascism becomes neo-fascism. This is why the far right works so hard at rewriting history to downplay the horrors of chattel slavery or do things as extreme as wanting to honor a bunch of cowardly soldiers who massacred fleeing defenseless children. There's no reason to mince words or give them the benefit of the doubt when the entire fascism bingo card has been filled at this point multiple times over. This is why, in the year of our Lord 2025, a man accused of drugging and raping a woman whose body is covered in white supremacist tattoos goes in front of a camera to proclaim that he wants to honor and celebrate human monsters. That is being done by a fascistic government who are engaged in a war against their own citizens, targeting vulnerable minorities and spending almost as much time trying to deify a white supremacist as they are covering up the largest child abuse scandal next to the Catholic Church.
On Twitter, Musk says he doesn't need to see that video. He says he'll bring the sub to where the boys are found. He can test it himself. And then he wrote, "Sorry, pedo guy, you really did ask for it."
Elon Musk's name has appeared in files relating to Jeffrey Epstein, with reference to him potentially visiting the island that Epstein owned.
Legalize comedy.
The only reason anyone would want to commemorate monsters who mass execute sick and dying children is because they want to normalize such behavior. Never be afraid to call something what it is. This is Nazi shit.
Because I don't know. I feel like liberals they have just enough empathy to be tricked by con men, but not enough to care about the children in Palestine. And it's a very frustrating thing. Because he's crying, and it's like, sure, you can cry about one person being shot, but that person's being used for propaganda. They said they want to make coins with Charlie Kirk's face on it. It's like, that's un-American. Normally we wait a couple years before putting a dead white supremacist on our money.
Thank you so much to our patrons for making this show possible. We could not fund it without you. And if you want to join, please check out patreon.com/the Serfs to unlock bonus episodes, uncensored content, and all the good stuff. Thanks to Anna Loves Riley, Addercap, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hegbard Salim, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet One 85, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demmel, Tigwick, and Words Greenwood.